Dear viewers, I regret to inform you that the video you are about to watch is extremely unpleasant. I urge you, right now, before this title screen comes up and leads into the introduction, leads into the discussion that is to follow, I urge you, I implore you, to close this window, find another video. There are plenty of videos on this particular YouTube. Videos of cats, videos of amusing anecdotes, videos of movies that are coming out, romantic movies, movies with cartoons, movies that are much more interesting, much more pleasant than what is about to be discussed. What I'm going to talk about is a book. I'm going to be talking about this book and the series that it pertains to, in a little bit of detail. It is not a pleasant book. It is not a pleasant series. It is full of uncomfortable truths. It is full of dastardly evil things, horrible villains, unfortunate events, and things going particularly badly almost nearly all of the time. Please heed my warning. Go forth. Find new things. Find more enjoyable things. Do not continue watching. With all due respect. I warned you. A series of unfortunate events. The bad beginning. That is the book I'm going to talk about today. It is a children's book written by Lemony Snicket. At least that's the pseudonym of the author. His real name, I believe, is Daniel Handler. And regardless, as you can see, first off, these are the books I have. I'm sure there may be some different ones in regards to other countries, but these are the ones available, I believe, in Canada and the US. As you can see, they are hardcover. They have wonderful little spines that look nice, all lined up on a shelf, and their pages are a little bit, well, it might be a little hard to see, but they're a little bit old school. They look like they're not all squared off, especially not at the ends here. They definitely look a little bit like they were hand-bound, kind of an older school, older touch to it. I kind of like that. Now, regardless of how pretty the book is, the reason why I'm going into a whole big spiel on why the book looks like it is because this is what caught my eye when I saw it sitting on a shelf. Not even in a bookstore, actually. I saw this sitting on the shelf of a Shoppers Drug Mart. And it caught my eye, so I walked over and I looked at it. I'm like, looks like a children's book. I pick it up and look at the back. Let's see what the back has to say. And the back has Lemony Snicket, the author, telling the reader not to pick up the book. Don't buy it, put it down, go read something else. That right there is not only a bit of brilliant marketing, but also very clever to make the reader interested. So I was interested. Picked it up, took it home, read it, and enjoyed the heck out of it. Now, granted, it is aimed towards, I think, 11 to 13-year-old children, but this brings up a wonderful little point that I wanted to make, and that is the fact that it doesn't matter if a book is targeted towards children. That doesn't mean that an adult cannot enjoy it. Now, I know what you're thinking. What are you talking about? The Cat in the Hat is a children's book. You think an adult is going to read The Cat in the Hat? Yeah, why not? It's a good book. It's The Cat in the Hat. So is One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. Also a good book. It's Dr. Seuss. Granted, it's not high literature, it's not Shakespeare or anything like that, but that doesn't mean it's not a good book. Length does not have anything to do with how good a book is. Content kind of has something to do with how good a book is, but it always depends on what the content is, what the aim of the book is. A children's book is aimed to be exciting and stimulating for children. Now, granted, an adult reading it probably isn't going to get the same amount that a child is going to get reading it. Now, if an adult is reading it to a child, something else entirely. And these books here are wonderful for adults to read on their own or for an adult to read to a child. Because the entire thing, I mean, Lemony Snicket really does hit the nail right on the head when he says, there's a lot of bad things that happen in this book. It's a thoroughly distressing, unpleasant book. And he's right about it. He doesn't mince words when it comes to that. But there's a lot of good that happens in the book. There's a lot of empowerment of the children basically taking their own lives into their own hands and saving themselves because, frankly, a lot of the adults in the book tend to be either out to get them or completely ineffectual at protecting them, which is why the children have to. Now, you've got three of the Baudelaire children. I believe it's Baudelaire. It might be Baudelaire. They could be French. It sounds kind of French. But there's three children. There's Violet, who is the oldest, a girl. You can see her on the cover of the front book. She is, I believe, 14 when the book starts, the first one. She is also an inventor and very capable of building all kinds of nifty contraptions and machines to help them escape or help them get into trouble or solve a problem. Then you have Klaus Baudelaire, who is a little bit younger, maybe 9, 10, possibly 8, not sure, can't remember. He is an extremely well-read young boy. Reading is one of the things he absolutely loves to do, and myself, being similar, I kind of have a bit of a connection to Klaus. He's my kind of dude. And then you have Sunny Baudelaire, who is like 1 or 2 years old at the time of the first book. She's still a baby. She doesn't do a lot. She talks baby talk most of the time. Only the other two kids, seem to really understand her. But she does kind of hold her own even for a baby. She also ends up being, in later books as it goes along, I think the third or the fourth in the series, of which there are 13. 13 books, and they each get a little bit thicker as they go along. Kind of like the J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter books, where as they go along, the content in them gets more mature, the books get thicker, there's more that happens in it. The writing evolves to suit the evolving and growing children. Same in this series, does much the same. Now Sunny, as I said, she gets going on and she starts developing a definite culinary ability to cook and come up with things and basically take care of the meals, even though she's like maybe 3 or 4 by the time the books end. So yeah, it's a little bit absurd. It's a little bit dark, a little bit of black comedy mixed in, gothic sensibilities as well. I've heard it mentioned. There's a lot of bad things that happen. It definitely deals with death a lot, these books, because in the very first chapter, the children find out that their parents have died in a house fire. Very first chapter. Just boom. Your parents are dead in a fire. It's not the sort of thing that a lot of children's books tackle. They don't go into that. And if they do, they kind of tread lightly with, kid gloves and whatnot. These books don't really do that. They definitely say, this is a horrible thing that happens. It is a terrible event, a terrible tragedy. But they also don't sugarcoat it either, because it's something that it happens. And I don't know. To me, this book, these series of books, definitely seems to be onto something. It it's very refreshing how it's all dealt with. Now, other things that the author does and pops around in with this, there are words that pop up, words that maybe children don't know or wouldn't really grasp the meaning of. So the author kindly explains it. And it's narrated by Lemony Snicket. He's the one not only writing the book, but he's kind of a narrator telling the tale of the Baudelaire children, uncovering the truth. His story, the story of the author, is mixed in with the story of the children, and there's connections that form. The villain of the piece, Count Olaf, is I know there's a movie based off it, and I know Jim Carrey played it, and he did very well with what he was given. But Count Olaf isn't really kind of a Jim Carrey villain. He's a little out there, kind of. I can see why they went to him for it, but the Count Olaf of the books is very much he's a very greedy man, a man who wants what he wants, and he wants that money that the Baudelaire children have. He wants their fortune, and he's trying to get it by any means necessary. So he will use disguises, and he will use plots and schemes and all kinds of things to try and get this money. And the children will see right through it because they're children. They're kind of perceptive. And, of course, the adults, as I mentioned, are really quite useless. So they often fall for Count Olaf's disguise and don't realize, even though Count Olaf is supposedly a villain and supposedly wanted, but he's wearing a beard now, so no, that can't be Count Olaf. Or he's clean-shaven and he has a monocle, so that can't be Count Olaf. Or look, he has a nice hat. That can't be Count Olaf. Count Olaf doesn't wear a hat. And so on, and so on, and so on. It's, as I said, it's absurd to children. To children, it would definitely, like, I can put myself kind of in the mind of a child when I read these books, and I kind of get that to a child, Count Olaf showing up and the adults not being able to see it, but the kids being able to see it. As a child, I would love that. Because that would make me as a child feel special. It would make me believe, I can do this. And the Baudelaire children overcoming adversity and beating Count Olaf again and again would make me as a child happy, because I would think I could do that too. So I really think for children out there, a series of unfortunate events is a wonderful thing. And for adults, if you haven't read that, if you're thinking, to yourself, maybe you're thinking that children's books you don't have to read because they're children's books, they wouldn't have anything to possibly offer you as an adult, I'm here to tell you, think again. Children's books have so much to offer. Even readers who are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, doesn't matter. Children's books targeted towards children, can actually have more to offer than books targeted towards your age range, the 30s and the 40-year-olds. Definitely. Because they're written with a very, how to put this, they're written with more of an outlook of educating, but also entertaining. Because these are children that they're writing for, that these authors write for. It's children, and children notoriously have very, very, well, I wouldn't say very, some children have more than others, but generally the attention span of a child tends to be somewhat shorter than an adult. They don't like sitting still a lot. They like to do things they enjoy. If they don't enjoy reading, well, then they're not going to sit still and read. And that's why a series of unfortunate events is one of those books that is nice. Because it not only entertains, but it also has very short chapters. There's only, I believe, 13 chapters per book. And at the beginning, they're very short, these chapters, a few pages long. So a child could read it, or you could read it to a child in a couple of minutes. You could read a couple chapters in a few minutes and have that be a nightly occurrence to get them into reading. It's really such a wonderful series of books. I won't spoil what goes on in all of them, but Count Olaf is usually always around and always causing trouble. That's kind of the premise of it all. The children tend to, well, the children tend to usually win, more or less, but sometimes it's a very Pyrrhic victory, which is actually a word that gets used in one of the books. I believe the 6th or the 7th. They bring up a Pyrrhic victory, a victory that is achieved, and it is a victory, but the cost of that victory makes the fact that you are victorious almost moot. So yes, it's a wonderful little series of books. There are 13 of them, and these hardcover copies, the ones that I bought, were about $16, $17 when I bought them in the US, so a little bit pricey if you're getting them like this. Maybe if you can get them in paperback, they might be a little bit cheaper. I don't know. Definitely cruise used bookstores if that price is a little bit steep for you. But as a series that is a almost collectible in a way, that is very much worth the price of buying, worth the price of reading this story, I would definitely recommend it. Now, I could go on and on about this, but I think I'm already running a little bit late, so I'm going to leave you with a little bit longer. The first chapter, it's only a few pages, so I leave you with chapter 1 of Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. The Bad Beginning. Book the First. Chapter 1. If you are interested in stories with happy endings, you would be better off reading some other book. In this book, not only is there no happy ending, there is no happy beginning, and very few happy things happen in the middle. This is because not very many happy things happened in the lives of the 3 Baudelaire youngsters. Violet, Klaus, and Sonny Baudelaire were intelligent children, and they were charming and resourceful and had pleasant facial features, but they were extremely unlucky, and most everything that happened to them was rife with misfortune, misery, and despair. I'm sorry to tell you this, but that's how the story goes. Their misfortune began one day at Briny Beach. The 3 Baudelaire children lived with their parents in an enormous mansion at the heart of a dirty and busy city, and occasionally their parents gave them permission to take a rickety trolley. The word rickety, you probably know, here means unsteady or likely to collapse. Alone to the seashore, where they would spend the day as a sort of vacation as long as they were home for dinner. This particular morning it was gray and cloudy, which didn't bother the Baudelaire youngsters one bit. When it was hot and sunny, Briny Beach was crowded with tourists, and it was impossible to find a good place to lay one's blanket. On a gray and cloudy days, the Baudelaires had the beach to themselves to do what they liked. Violet Baudelaire, the eldest, liked to skip rocks. Like most 14-year-olds, she was right-handed, so the rocks skipped farther across the murky water when Violet used her right hand than when she used her left. As she skipped rocks, she was looking out at the horizon and thinking about an invention she wanted to build. Anyone who knew Violet well could tell she was thinking hard, because her long hair was tied up in a ribbon to keep it out of her eyes. Violet had a real knack for inventing and building strange devices, so her brain was often filled with images of pulleys, levers, and gears, and she never wanted to be distracted by something as trivial as her hair. This morning she was thinking about how to construct a device that could retrieve a rock after you had skipped it into the ocean. Klaus Baudelaire, the middle child and the only boy, liked to examine creatures in tide pools. Klaus was a little older than 12 and wore glasses, which made him look intelligent. He was intelligent. The Baudelaire parents had an enormous library in their mansion, a room filled with thousands of books on nearly every subject. Being only 12, Klaus, of course, had not read all of the books in the Baudelaire library, but he had read a great many of them and had retained a lot of the information from his readings. He knew how to tell an alligator from a crocodile. He knew who killed Julius Caesar, and he knew much about the tiny, slimy animals found at Briny Beach, which he was examining now. Sunny Baudelaire, the youngest, liked to bite things. She was an infant, and very small for her age, scarcely larger than a boot. What she lacked in size, however, she made up for with the size and sharpness of her 4 teeth. Sunny was at an age where one mostly speaks in a series of unintelligible shrieks, except when she used the few actual words in her vocabulary, like bottle, mommy, and bite. Most people had trouble understanding what it was that Sunny was saying. For instance, this morning she was saying "gach" over and over, which probably meant, "Look at that mysterious figure emerging from the fog." Sure enough, in the distance, along the misty shore of Briny Beach, there could be seen a tall figure striding toward the Baudelaire children. Sunny had already been staring and shrieking at the figure for some time when Klaus looked up from the spiny crab he was examining and saw it too. He reached over and touched Violet's arm, bringing her out of her inventing thoughts. "Look at that," Klaus said, and pointed toward the figure. It was drawing closer, and the children could see a few details. It was about the size of an adult, except its head was tall and rather square. "What do you think it is?" Violet asked. "I don't know," Klaus said, squinting at it, "but it seems to be moving right toward us." "We're alone on the beach," Violet said a little nervously. "There's nobody else it could be moving toward." She felt the slender, smooth stone in her left hand, which she had been about to try to skip as far as she could. She had a sudden thought to throw it at the figure, because it seemed so frightening. "It only seems scary," Klaus said, as if reading his sister's thoughts, "because of all the mist." That was true. As the figure reached them, the children saw with relief that it was not anybody frightening at all, but somebody they knew, Mr. Poe. Mr. Poe was a friend of Mr. and Mrs. Baudelaire's, whom the children had met many times at dinner parties. One of the things Klaus, Violet, and Sunny really liked about their parents was that they didn't send their children away when they had company over, but allowed them to join the adults at the dinner table and participate in the conversation as long as they helped clear the table. The children remembered Mr. Poe because he always had a cold and was constantly excusing himself from the table to have a fit of coughing in the next room. Mr. Poe took off his top hat, which had made his head look large and square in the fog, and stood for a moment, coughing loudly into a white handkerchief. Violet and Klaus moved forward to shake his hand and say, "How do you do?" "How do you do?" said Violet. "How do you do?" said Klaus. "Odo yow," said Sunny. "Fine, thank you," said Mr. Poe, but he looked very sad. For a few seconds nobody said anything, and the children wondered what Mr. Poe was doing there at Briny Beach, when he should have been at the bank in the city where he worked. He was not dressed for the beach. "It's a nice day," Violet said finally, making conversation. Sunny made a noise that sounded like an angry bird, and Klaus picked her up and held her. "Yes, it is a nice day," Mr. Poe said absently, staring out at the empty beach. "I'm afraid I have some very bad news for you children." The 3 Baudelaire siblings looked at him. Violet, with some embarrassment, felt the stone in her left hand and was glad she had not thrown it at Mr. Poe. "Your parents," Mr. Poe said, "have perished in a terrible fire." The children didn't say anything. "They perished," Mr. Poe said, "in a fire that destroyed the entire house. I'm very, very sorry to tell you this, my dears." Violet took her eyes off Mr. Poe and stared out at the ocean. Mr. Poe had never called the Baudelaire children "my dears" before. She understood the words he was saying, but thought he must be joking, playing a terrible joke on her brother and sister. "Perished," Mr. Poe said, "means killed." "We know what the word perished means," Klaus said crossly. He did know what the word perished meant, but he was still having trouble understanding exactly what it was that Mr. Poe had said. It seemed to him that Mr. Poe must somehow have misspoken. "The fire department arrived, of course," Mr. Poe said, "but they were too late. The entire house was engulfed in fire. It burned to the ground." Klaus pictured all the books in the library going up in flames. Now he'd never read all of them. Mr. Poe coughed several times into his handkerchief before continuing. I was sent to retrieve you here and to take you to my home, where you'll stay for some time while we figure things out. I am the executor of your parents' estate. That means I will be handling their enormous fortune and figuring out where you children will go. When Violet comes of age, the fortune will be yours, but the bank will take charge of it until you are old enough. Although he said he was the executor, Violet felt like Mr. Poe was the executioner. He had simply walked down the beach to them and changed their lives forever. Come with me, Mr. Poe said, and held out his hand. In order to take it, Violet had to drop the stone she was holding. Klaus took Violet's other hand, and Sunny took Klaus's other hand. And in that manner, the three Baudelaire children, the Baudelaire orphans now, were led away from the beach and from their previous lives. A little bit long, I know, but that will give you an idea of the writing style of Lemony Snicket and how the story tends to go. It's very, very blatant, very straightforward. And that is why I think you should be reading Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, Book the First, The Bad Beginning.